Picture this. You're standing in your backyard on what should be an ordinary Tuesday evening, perhaps taking out the trash or calling your dog inside for the night. The air carries that familiar coolness that comes just after sunset, and you glance upward out of habit, expecting to see that reassuring silver orb hanging in the darkening sky. But instead, you see nothing. Not clouds obscuring the moon. Not the new moon phase where it's simply not visible. Complete, absolute absence. Where the moon should be, there's only the endless black of space, punctuated by stars that suddenly seem smaller, more distant, almost mocking in their inadequacy to fill the void at first. Your mind struggles to process what you're seeing, or rather, what you're not seeing. Perhaps you blink hard, rub your eyes, even take off your glasses if you wear them. Surely this must be some trick of vision, some momentary confusion. But no matter how many times you look up, the result is the same. The moon, Earth's constant companion for over 4 billion years, has simply vanished without a trace. Across the globe, millions of other people are having this same surreal experience. In Tokyo, where it's already early morning, commuters boarding trains notice the strange darkness that lingered longer than it should have. In London, couples walking along the Thames stop mid-conversation, pointing upward with trembling fingers at the empty sky. Children in Sao Paulo who were supposed to be sleeping peek through their bedroom windows, sensing somehow that something fundamental has changed in their world. The silence is perhaps the most unnerving part. Not the literal silence. Cities still hum with traffic, dogs still bark, and life continues its noisy march forward. But there's a deeper silence, an absence that seems to permeate everything. The tides, which have been rising and falling in their eternal rhythm for eons, begin to slow. Waves that should be crashing against shores with predictable force instead lap gently, almost hesitantly, as if the ocean itself is confused by this cosmic abandonment, standing there in your backyard. You might notice other subtle changes that your subconscious registers before your rational mind can catch up. The darkness feels different, heavier, more complete. Street lights that never seemed particularly bright before now appear to be working overtime, casting harsh pools of yellow light that only emphasize the shadows between them. The familiar silver glow that used to bathe everything in soft, romantic light is gone, leaving the world looking somehow more harsh, more angular. You pull out your phone, and the screen's artificial glow seems almost violent against the newfound darkness. Social media is already exploding with confused posts. Is anyone else not seeing the moon? Reads one tweet with thousands of retweets in just minutes. Moon missing trends worldwide before news outlets can even begin to formulate their headlines. Videos flood TikTok and Instagram. Shaky phone cameras pointed at empty sky. Voices filled with bewilderment asking the same question over and over. Where did it go? But perhaps the most haunting aspect of this moment isn't the visual absence or even the social media frenzy. It's the feeling that settles deep in your chest. A primal understanding that something essential has been taken from the world. Humans have looked up at the moon for as long as we've existed. We've used it to mark time, to navigate across oceans, to inspire poetry and romance. Werewolf legends, harvest festivals, and romantic moonlit walks all suddenly feel like relics from another era. Memories of a world that no longer exists as you stand there, still staring upward. A chill runs down your spine that has nothing to do with the evening air. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, a terrible question begins to form. If something as massive and permanent as the moon can simply vanish without warning, what else might we lose? What other assumptions about our stable, predictable world might be wrong? The night feels endless now, no longer divided by the familiar phases of moonrise and moonset. Stars that were once supporting actors in the moon's grand performance now have center stage, but they seem inadequate for the role. Too small and too far away to provide the comfort and guidance humans have relied upon for millennia. And then, as you finally turn to go back inside, another realization hits you like a physical blow. If the moon controls the tides, and the tides are already changing, then this is just the beginning. The question that will haunt the coming days begins to crystallize in your mind. If the moon is gone, what's the very first effect we'd feel on Earth? The first 24 hours after the moon's disappearance unfold like a fever dream, with humanity cycling through disbelief, panic, and desperate attempts at rational explanation. In observatories around the world, astronomers who have spent their entire careers studying celestial mechanics find themselves staring at instruments that confirm the impossible. The Moon, with its 73.5 million billion tons of rock and metal, has simply ceased to exist in any detectable form. Dr. Sarah Chun at the Palomar Observatory in California is among the first scientists to officially confirm what millions of people are seeing with their naked eyes. Her hands shake as she adjusts the telescope for the third time, hoping against hope that the sophisticated equipment will reveal what human eyes cannot. But the radio telescopes detect no debris field. The gravitational sensors show no residual mass. And the infrared cameras reveal nothing but empty space where Earth's satellite should be. This isn't scientifically possible, she whispers to her colleague, Dr. Martinez, who's been frantically checking calculations on his laptop for the past hour. You can't just lose something that massive. The energy required to destroy it would have sterilized half the solar system. And if it were moved, we'd detect the gravitational disturbances. But there's nothing. It's like it never existed. Meanwhile, in emergency rooms across the globe, a curious phenomenon begins to emerge. Patients arrive complaining of sudden insomnia, unexplained anxiety, and what many describe as feeling unmoored. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, working the night shift at Boston General, notices that emergency room visits have increased by 30% since sunset. It's the strangest thing, she tells the night nurse. They can't put their finger on what's wrong. They just feel off. The psychological impact becomes even more apparent on social media platforms, which experience unprecedented traffic as people seek connection and explanation. Facebook crashes twice in the first 6 hours. Twitter's servers strain under the weight of millions of posts tagged with #MoonGone, #WhereIsTheMoon, and #EmptySky. TikTok videos range from terrified teenagers crying in their bedrooms to conspiracy theorists claiming this was prophesied in ancient texts. Religious leaders worldwide struggle to provide comfort and context for an event that seems to transcend earthly understanding. In Vatican City, Pope Francis calls an emergency meeting with his cardinals. While in Jerusalem, rabbis and Islamic scholars engage in heated theological discussions about the meaning of this celestial disappearance. Buddhist monks in Tibet speak of impermanence made manifest, while Hindu priests debate whether this signals the end of one cosmic age and the beginning of another. Government responses vary dramatically across nations. The United States President addresses the nation at 3 a.m. Eastern Time, flanked by NASA officials and military advisors, attempting to project calm while clearly struggling with information that challenges every assumption about physical reality. "We are monitoring the situation closely," becomes the repeated refrain, though nobody can adequately explain what monitoring means when the object of concern has vanished entirely. In Russia, President Putin convenes an emergency session of the Security Council, demanding to know if this could be some form of unprecedented weapons test by rival nations. Chinese officials initially attempt to suppress social media discussion of the event before realizing the futility of denying something visible to every person on Earth. North Korea, in characteristic fashion, claims their scientists predicted this event and are already developing technology to address the situation. But perhaps the most revealing reactions come from ordinary people in their everyday environments. Parents struggle to explain to children why the moon they sang about in lullabies is no longer in the sky. "Where did it go, Mommy?" becomes a question that has no satisfactory answer. Night shift workers, nurses, security guards, truck drivers report feeling disoriented and strangely lonely as they navigate through darkness that feels more complete than they've ever experienced. Farmers, particularly those who've guided their planting and harvesting by lunar cycles for generations, find themselves consulting almanacs that suddenly seem as outdated as medieval maps. Fishermen who've timed their expeditions by tidal patterns discover that their inherited wisdom is now useless. The Inuit elders in northern Canada, whose storytelling traditions are deeply intertwined with lunar mythology, gather in unprecedented emergency councils to discuss what this means for their cultural understanding of the world. Financial markets, opening in Asia just hours after the disappearance, immediately plummet as investors grapple with the economic implications of such a fundamental change to Earth's systems. Agricultural futures crash as traders realize that crop cycles, dependent on predictable seasonal patterns that the moon helps regulate, may be permanently disrupted. Coastal real estate, dependent on predictable tidal patterns, becomes suddenly uncertain in value. Emergency services report a spike in calls, though not necessarily for traditional emergencies. Police departments are flooded with reports from people who are convinced they're witnessing the end of the world. Suicide prevention hotlines experience call volumes unlike anything they've handled, as people struggle with existential terror at the realization that the universe might be far less stable than they believed. Scientists at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center work around the clock, running computer models to predict the immediate consequences of lunar absence. Their preliminary findings, still being verified as dawn breaks over the East Coast, paint a disturbing picture of cascading effects that will ripple through every system on Earth. But these technical discussions seem almost secondary to the raw human emotion of loss that permeates every conversation. As the first sunrise since the moon's disappearance begins to paint the eastern sky, a new fear settles over humanity. The sun, which has always seemed more distant and impersonal than the moon, now feels like the only celestial body standing between Earth and the vast, uncaring darkness of space. If the moon could vanish without warning, people wonder with growing dread, what else might disappear? But beyond human shock and existential terror, Earth itself begins to change in terrifying ways that will soon make psychological trauma seem like the least of humanity's concerns. By the third day after the moon's disappearance, the most immediately observable change becomes undeniably clear to anyone living near a coastline. The tides have begun to die. What started as a subtle slowing of wave patterns has evolved into something far more disturbing, an eerie stillness that transforms familiar seascapes into alien landscapes. Maria Santos, a lifeguard who has worked the beaches of San Diego for 15 years, stands on the pier where she's watched thousands of sunrises. But today the view fills her with an inexplicable dread. The waves are wrong, she tells her supervisor, struggling to articulate what her instincts understand, but her mind can barely process. They're not breathing anymore. She's right, though she doesn't yet understand the full scientific implications of what she's observing. The moon's gravitational pull has been the primary force driving tidal action for billions of years, creating the rhythmic rise and fall of sea levels that every coastal ecosystem depends upon. Without that celestial tugboat pulling at Earth's waters, the oceans are settling into a gravitational relationship dominated solely by the sun, whose tidal influence is less than half as strong as the moon's was. The result is a dramatic flattening of tidal ranges worldwide. In the Bay of Fundy, famous for having the highest tides on Earth, with water levels that regularly rise and fall by more than 50 feet, local residents witness something unprecedented in recorded human history. The bay, which normally empties and fills like a massive bathtub twice daily, now experiences only gentle variations of a few feet. James McDougall, whose family has been fishing these waters for 4 generations, motors his boat across waters that should be 15 feet higher than they are. "My grandfather's harbor charts are useless now," he mutters, navigating carefully around newly exposed rocks that have been underwater for as long as anyone can remember. The whole seafloor is different. 30 years I've been running this route, and now I don't recognize my own fishing grounds. But the changes go far beyond navigation challenges. The intertidal zones, those crucial areas between high and low tide marks, have been dramatically altered. These regions, which support some of the most diverse and productive ecosystems on Earth, depend entirely on the regular rhythm of exposure and submersion that tides provide. Millions of species of barnacles, mussels, sea anemones, and countless other creatures have evolved complex life cycles timed precisely to tidal patterns that no longer exist. Dr. Rebecca Torres, a marine biologist at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, documents the early stages of what she fears will be an ecological catastrophe. Wading through tide pools that now remain static hour after hour, she observes the beginning of massive die-offs. These organisms can't adapt to constant submersion, she explains to her research team, pointing to beds of mussels that are beginning to suffocate in water that no longer recedes. And the species that depend on regular air exposure are drowning in what used to be their normal habitat. The effects ripple upward through the food chain with terrifying speed. Shorebirds that depend on exposed tidal flats for feeding find their foraging grounds permanently underwater. Thousands of sandpipers, plovers, and dunlin that should be feeding on marine worms and small crustaceans instead circle empty beaches, their desperate calls echoing across waters that no longer retreat to reveal their food sources. Commercial fishing operations face immediate crisis as species that spawn in tidal rhythm find their reproductive cycles completely disrupted. Pacific salmon, whose entire life cycle is precisely timed to tidal and seasonal patterns, begin exhibiting confused behavior. Fish that should be moving upstream remain in estuaries that no longer provide the environmental cues they've relied upon for millions of years of evolution. Captain Elena Rodriguez, who operates a fishing fleet out of Monterey Bay, watches her livelihood disappear as fish populations crash with unprecedented speed. The sardines are gone, she reports grimly to the harbor master. Not moved to different waters, gone. And the anchovies, the herring. It's like the whole food chain just stopped working. Port cities around the world scramble to adapt to the new reality. Harbors designed around predictable tidal schedules find themselves either permanently flooded or permanently exposed. The Port of London, which has managed tidal variations for over 1,000 years, suddenly faces water levels that remain constant at what used to be mid-tide. Ships that relied on high tide to clear shallow areas now find themselves stranded, while other vessels discover they can no longer reach docks that are now permanently underwater. The economic implications are staggering. Global shipping, which moves 90% of world trade, depends on ports designed around tidal schedules. Container ships that arrive expecting high tide to lift them over harbor sandbars instead find themselves stuck in water levels that no longer rise. Emergency dredging operations begin worldwide, but the scale of required modifications to global port infrastructure seems almost impossible to comprehend. More disturbing still are the changes in ocean circulation patterns. The moon's gravitational influence has been a crucial component in driving deep ocean currents that distribute heat and nutrients around the globe. Without tidal mixing, these currents begin to slow and alter their paths. Water that normally circulates from surface to depth and back again starts to stratify, creating oxygen-depleted layers that threaten marine life throughout the water column. Dr. Torres and her team document temperature changes that suggest the beginning of a fundamental shift in ocean chemistry. Tidal action has been mixing oxygenated surface water with deeper layers for billions of years, she explains in an emergency video conference with marine biologists worldwide. Without that mixing, we're looking at the potential for massive dead zones, areas where marine life simply cannot survive. The beaches themselves become strange, alien places. Families who visit their favorite coastal vacation spots find landscapes that seem familiar yet fundamentally wrong. Children building sandcastles notice that waves that should wash their creations away instead lap gently and consistently at the same level hour after hour. The rhythmic sound of surf, which has provided humanity with a natural soundtrack for relaxation and contemplation for millennia, is replaced by an unnatural constancy that feels more like white noise than the music of the sea. Coastal erosion patterns, shaped by millions of years of tidal action, begin to change in unpredictable ways. Beaches that have remained stable for decades start either building up or eroding as wave action focuses consistently at the same elevation rather than distributing its energy across a tidal range. Cliffs that have been gradually shaped by the rise and fall of water levels face new stress patterns that threaten to destabilize them in unexpected ways. As the first week without tides draws to a close, coastal communities worldwide begin to understand that they're witnessing not just a temporary disruption, but the end of a fundamental characteristic of life on Earth. The oceans, which have pulsed with lunar rhythm since complex life began, have fallen into an unnatural stillness that speaks of deeper changes yet to come. But the oceans aren't the only systems the moon kept in balance. Earth itself, freed from its celestial anchor, begins to wobble in ways that will make tidal disruption seem like a minor inconvenience. 3 weeks after the moon's disappearance, Dr. Kenji Nakamura at the Tokyo Institute of Technology makes a discovery that transforms global concern into existential terror. While analyzing data from the International Earth Rotation and Reference System Service, he notices an anomaly so subtle that it almost escapes detection. Earth's rotational axis has begun to shift in ways that violate everything scientists understand about planetary mechanics. The wobble is increasing, he announces to an emergency session of the International Astronomical Union, his voice barely steady as he presents data that challenges the fundamental stability of human civilization. Without the moon's gravitational influence stabilizing our axial tilt, Earth is beginning to behave like a spinning top that's losing its balance. To understand the magnitude of this crisis, one must appreciate the moon's role as Earth's cosmic stabilizer. For over 4 billion years, our satellite has acted like a gyroscopic anchor, keeping Earth's rotational axis tilted at a steady 23.5 degrees relative to our orbital plane around the Sun. This stability has been the foundation of predictable seasons, stable climate zones, and the environmental consistency that allowed complex life to evolve and thrive. But now, freed from lunar influence, Earth begins to wobble like a cosmic spinning top winding down. The changes start small, mere minutes of arc that only sophisticated instruments can detect. But Dr. Nakamura's computer models predict that these tiny variations will compound over months and years into chaotic shifts that could see Earth's axis swinging wildly between extreme angles, bringing unprecedented climate upheaval to every region of the planet. The first observable effects manifest in ways that seem almost mundane until their implications become clear. GPS systems, which depend on precise knowledge of Earth's orientation in space, begin providing increasingly inaccurate readings. Commercial airline pilots notice that their navigation systems require constant recalibration. Satellite communications start experiencing mysterious interruptions as Earth's changing orientation affects the precise alignment needed for optimal signal transmission. Weather patterns, governed by the complex interaction between solar heating and Earth's rotation, begin exhibiting disturbing irregularities. The jet stream, that high-altitude river of air that helps distribute heat around the globe and determines weather patterns for entire continents, starts developing unprecedented kinks and loops. Meteorologists find their computer models increasingly unreliable as the fundamental parameters they depend upon, Earth's consistent rotation and orientation, become variables instead of constants. Sarah Mitchell, a climatologist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado, works 18-hour days trying to understand the implications of the changing data. The models are breaking down, she explains to her increasingly worried team. Everything we know about weather prediction assumes Earth maintains a stable rotational axis. But that assumption is no longer valid. We're essentially trying to predict the weather on a planet we no longer fully understand. The agricultural implications become apparent first in regions closest to the poles, where even small changes in axial tilt translate to significant variations in seasonal sunlight. Farmers in northern Canada and Siberia notice that daylight hours, which should be following predictable patterns towards spring, instead fluctuate unpredictably from day to day. Crops that depend on precise photoperiod triggers for growth and reproduction begin exhibiting confused behavior, some flowering too early, others remaining dormant well past their normal emergence time. In Svalbard, Norway, where the midnight sun and polar night have followed the same pattern for thousands of years, residents experience something unprecedented in recorded history. The sun, which should set for the final time before the long polar winter, instead rises and sets erratically as Earth's changing tilt alters the relationship between their location and solar radiation. Children who have grown up with the rhythm of extreme seasons find themselves in a world where sunrise and sunset no longer follow any predictable schedule, but the effects aren't limited to polar regions. As Earth's axial instability increases, the boundaries between climate zones begin to blur in ways that threaten agricultural systems worldwide. The tropical belt, which has remained relatively stable for millions of years, starts to shift northward and southward unpredictably. Regions that have enjoyed Mediterranean climates for millennia experience sudden temperature swings that kill olive groves and vineyards that have been cultivated for generations. The Sahara Desert, whose northern boundary has been relatively stable throughout recorded history, begins to experience unprecedented weather variations. Towns on the desert's edge that have adapted to predictable patterns of heat and aridity suddenly face torrential rains that their infrastructure cannot handle, followed by temperature drops that kill vegetation adapted to consistent warmth. Ocean currents, already disrupted by the loss of tidal mixing, face additional chaos as changing wind patterns alter the surface forces that drive global circulation. The Gulf Stream, which has warmed Western Europe for thousands of years, begins to shift its path as the trade winds that help drive it respond to Earth's changing orientation. London experiences its first sub-zero temperatures in March since records began, while Miami faces unseasonable cold snaps that kill tropical vegetation throughout southern Florida. Animal migration patterns, evolved over millions of years to follow predictable seasonal cues, collapse into confusion. Arctic terns, which normally migrate from Arctic to Antarctic in one of nature's most remarkable journeys, find themselves navigationally lost as the magnetic and solar cues they rely upon become inconsistent. Monarch butterflies, whose multi-generational migration to Mexico depends on precise seasonal timing, arrive at overwintering sites to find climate conditions completely different from what their instincts expect. The psychological impact on human populations becomes increasingly severe as the fundamental reliability of natural cycles disappears. Seasonal affective disorder, normally limited to winter months in northern latitudes, begins appearing year-round as unpredictable changes in daylight duration affect human circadian rhythms. Emergency rooms report increasing numbers of patients suffering from sleep disorders, depression, and anxiety disorders that doctors struggle to treat when the environmental cues that regulate human biological clocks become unreliable. Indigenous communities, whose traditional knowledge systems are based on detailed observations of natural cycles accumulated over thousands of years, face cultural crisis as their ancestral wisdom becomes inapplicable to a world where seasonal patterns no longer follow ancient rules. Inuit elders who have predicted weather and ice conditions with remarkable accuracy for decades find their knowledge useless in an environment where fundamental patterns have become chaotic. Economic systems built around predictable agricultural seasons face collapse as crop failures cascade through global food networks. Insurance companies, whose risk models assume that natural disasters follow statistical patterns derived from historical data, find themselves facing claims that exceed their ability to pay. The concept of 100-year floods, or once-in-a-century storms, becomes meaningless when the climate systems that define such events are themselves undergoing fundamental change. Energy infrastructure designed around predictable heating and cooling season struggles to adapt to erratic temperature swings. Power grids experience unprecedented stress as air conditioning demand spikes during unexpected heat waves, while heating systems face sudden extreme cold in regions that rarely needed such capacity. Solar power installations, calibrated for the sun's predictable seasonal path across the sky, become inefficient as Earth's changing tilt alters the angle and duration of solar exposure. As the first month of axial instability draws to a close, computer models begin to suggest truly catastrophic possibilities. If Earth's wobble continues to increase, the planet could eventually experience axial shifts of 85 degrees or more, meaning that regions currently enjoying temperate climates could find themselves in polar conditions, while current polar regions might face tropical heat. The ice caps, already beginning to respond to changing solar exposure patterns, show signs of accelerated melting in some areas and unexpected growth in others. Scientists worldwide work desperately to understand the timeline of these changes and whether any intervention might be possible. But as Dr. Nakamura reviews his latest calculations, he realizes that Earth's axial instability is just the beginning of a cascade of effects that will touch every aspect of life on the planet. And this instability ripples into something even greater. Life itself faces extinction threats that make climate change seem like a minor adjustment compared to the complete Breakdown of the environmental systems that have supported complex ecosystems for millions of years. 6 weeks into the moonless world, Dr. Elena Vasquez stands in what was once one of the most biodiverse coral reefs in the Caribbean, but now resembles an underwater graveyard. The absence of predictable tidal cycles, combined with erratic seasonal patterns caused by Earth's wobbling axis, has triggered a cascade of ecological collapse that is reshaping life on Earth at a pace that evolution cannot match. 90% of the coral is bleached, she reports to her research team through her diving mask's communication system, her voice carrying the weight of witnessing an ecosystem die in real time. But this isn't the gradual bleaching we've seen with climate change. This is complete system failure. The fish populations have crashed by 70% in just 5 weeks. The coral reef crisis exemplifies a global phenomenon that scientists are struggling to document as quickly as it unfolds. Coral polyps, which have survived ice ages and mass extinctions over millions of years, depend on symbiotic relationships with algae that are exquisitely sensitive to environmental stability. The disrupted tidal patterns have altered water chemistry, while unpredictable seasonal changes have created temperature and light variations that break the delicate balance these organisms require to survive. But the oceanic crisis extends far beyond coral reefs. The collapse of tidal ecosystems has eliminated crucial nursery habitats for countless marine species. Fish populations that spawn in the rhythm of lunar cycles find their reproductive timing completely disrupted. The absence of tidal mixing has created oxygen-depleted zones that expand daily, suffocating marine life throughout the water column. Captain Maria Santos, who has fished the waters off the coast of Portugal for 30 years, returns to port with empty nets for the 14th consecutive day. The fish are gone, she tells the harbor master, her weathered hands gesturing helplessly toward the sea. Not hiding, not moved to different waters. Gone. The sardines, the mackerel, even the anchovies that were always here. It's like the ocean has become empty. The terrestrial ecosystems face equally devastating disruptions as Earth's axial wobble creates chaotic seasonal patterns that shatter the delicate timing upon which all life depends. In the Amazon rainforest, trees that have adapted to predictable wet and dry seasons begin experiencing unprecedented stress as rainfall patterns become completely unpredictable. Some areas face torrential rains that cause widespread flooding and root rot, while others endure droughts that arrive months earlier than any plant has evolved to expect. Dr. Carlos Mendoza, who has studied Amazon ecology for 20 years, documents the beginning of what he fears will be the collapse of the world's most important terrestrial ecosystem. The flowering and fruiting cycles have become completely desynchronized. He explains while examining a Brazil nut tree that is simultaneously blooming and dropping leaves in apparent confusion. The relationships between plants and their pollinators, predators, and prey are breaking down because nothing is happening when it's supposed to. Migratory species face perhaps the greatest immediate threat, as the environmental cues they have followed for millions of years become unreliable or disappear entirely. Arctic terns, which navigate using a combination of magnetic fields, star positions, and seasonal daylight patterns, find themselves unable to complete migrations that their species has successfully accomplished for eons. Thousands of birds become stranded in locations where they cannot survive, lacking the food sources their instincts expect to find. The monarch butterfly migration, one of nature's most remarkable phenomena, collapses entirely as the insect's navigation systems become confused by erratic seasonal cues. Butterflies that should be flying south for winter instead scatter in random directions, arriving at destinations where the climate and food sources are completely unsuitable for their survival. The Oyamel fir forests in Mexico that have provided overwintering habitat for millions of monarchs for millennia wait empty as the butterflies that should have arrived never complete their journey. Pollinator populations, already stressed by human activities, face extinction as their carefully timed relationships with flowering plants break down. Bees that emerge from hibernation expecting to find specific flowers blooming discover either bare branches or plants that have already completed their reproductive cycles. The synchronization between pollinator activity and plant flowering evolved over millions of years, collapses within weeks as seasonal patterns become unpredictable. Agricultural systems worldwide face imminent collapse as both wild and domestic ecosystems fail simultaneously. Crops that depend on insect pollination find themselves without the bees, butterflies, and other insects they need to reproduce. Fruit orchards from California's Central Valley to the apple regions of Washington state face complete crop failure as pollinator populations crash. Farmer Tom Rodriguez, whose family has grown apples in Washington for 4 generations, walks through orchards where trees bloom erratically, some covered in flowers while others remain dormant, all while the few remaining bees seem confused about when and where to forage. My grandfather's notes about when to expect bloom, when to spray, when to harvest, none of it means anything now, he says, staring at trees that seem to be following their own chaotic schedule. 40 years of farming experience, and I feel like I don't know anything about how plants grow. The collapse extends to soil ecosystems, which depend on predictable cycles of freezing and thawing, wet and dry periods, and seasonal temperature variations to maintain the complex communities of bacteria, fungi, and invertebrates that create fertile earth. Earthworms, whose activity helps aerate soil and process organic matter, become confused by erratic temperature patterns and either remain dormant when they should be active or emerge during conditions that kill them. Predator-prey relationships, finely tuned by millions of years of coevolution, break down as the timing of reproduction, migration, and food availability becomes unpredictable. Arctic foxes arrive at seabird colonies expecting to find eggs and young birds, only to discover that the birds have already finished nesting or haven't begun. The foxes face starvation while bird populations, suddenly freed from predation pressure, experience unsustainable population booms that quickly crash when food supplies become inadequate. Forest ecosystems face compound stresses as trees adapted to specific seasonal patterns of temperature, moisture, and daylight struggle to photosynthesize and grow under chaotic conditions. Deciduous forests that should be preparing for winter instead cycle unpredictably between growing and dormant phases, exhausting energy reserves that normally sustain them through predictable seasonal changes. The boreal forests of Canada and Siberia, which represents some of Earth's largest carbon storage systems, begin showing signs of massive die-offs as spruce and fir trees experience temperature and daylight variations their physiology cannot handle. These forests, which have stored carbon for thousands of years, begin releasing massive amounts of greenhouse gases as dead trees decompose, and stressed living trees reduce their carbon uptake. Indigenous communities that have maintained sustainable relationships with local ecosystems for thousands of years watch helplessly as the natural world they depend upon transforms beyond recognition. Traditional hunting and gathering practices become impossible when animal populations crash and plant communities change their growth and reproduction patterns unpredictably. Mary Takota, an elder of the Ojibwe Nation whose ancestors have harvested wild rice in the lakes of northern Minnesota for generations, stares at waters where the rice plants bloom at the wrong time and produce seeds that wildlife cannot use. The rice doesn't know when to grow anymore, she explains to her granddaughter. The ducks and geese that should come to eat the seeds arrive when there are no seeds, and the seeds ripen when there are no birds to eat them. Everything is out of balance. As the second month without the moon draws to a close, ecological surveys worldwide document species extinction rates that exceed the most pessimistic projections for human-caused environmental change. The interconnected web of life, which has adapted to lunar cycles and stable seasons for hundreds of millions of years, faces disruption so fundamental that recovery may be impossible for many ecosystems. But the dangers don't stop at Earth's surface. The sky itself begins to betray us as the moon's absence exposes our planet to cosmic threats that are celestial. Guardian had been quietly deflecting for billions of years. 2 months after the moon's disappearance, astronomer Dr. Lisa Park makes a discovery that transforms humanity's understanding of just how much protection we've lost. Working the night shift at the Arecibo Observatory's replacement facility, she notices an anomaly in the data that makes her hands tremble as she reaches for the emergency phone to contact NASA's Planetary Defense Office. We're seeing a 300% % increase in near-Earth asteroid approaches, she reports. Her voice tight with barely controlled fear. Objects that should have been deflected by the moon's gravitational influence are now following collision courses with Earth. And we're detecting impacts that would have been prevented if our lunar shield were still in place. For over 4 billion years, the moon has served as humanity's cosmic bodyguard, using its gravitational field to deflect or capture countless asteroids, comets, and space debris that might otherwise have struck Earth. The heavily cratered lunar surface tells the story of eons of protection, each impact scar representing a cosmic bullet that hit our satellite instead of our planet. But now, Earth stands naked in the cosmic shooting gallery without its faithful guardian. 90% of the coral is bleached, she reports to her research team through her diving mask's communication system, her voice carrying the weight of witnessing an ecosystem die in real time. But this isn't the gradual bleaching we've seen with climate change. This is complete system failure. The fish populations have crashed by 70% in just 5 weeks. The coral reef crisis exemplifies a global phenomenon that scientists are struggling to document as quickly as it unfolds. Coral polyps, which have survived ice ages and mass extinctions over millions of years, depend on symbiotic relationships with algae that are exquisitely sensitive to environmental stability. The disrupted tidal patterns have altered water chemistry, while unpredictable seasonal changes have created temperature and light variations that break the delicate balance these organisms require to survive. But the oceanic crisis extends far beyond coral reefs. The collapse of tidal ecosystems has eliminated crucial nursery habitats for countless marine species. Fish populations that spawn in the rhythm of lunar cycles find their reproductive timing completely disrupted. The absence of tidal mixing has created oxygen-depleted zones that expand daily, suffocating marine life throughout the water column. Captain Maria Santos, who has fished the waters off the coast of Portugal for 30 years, returns to port with empty nets for the 14th consecutive day. The fish are gone, she tells the harbor master, her weathered hands gesturing helplessly toward the sea. Not hiding, not moved to different waters. Gone. The sardines, the mackerel, even the anchovies that were always here. It's like the ocean has become empty. The terrestrial ecosystems face equally devastating disruptions as Earth's axial wobble creates chaotic seasonal patterns that shatter the delicate timing upon which all life depends. In the Amazon rainforest, trees that have adapted to predictable wet and dry seasons begin experiencing unprecedented stress as rainfall patterns become completely unpredictable. Some areas face torrential rains that cause widespread flooding and root rot, while others endure droughts that arrive months earlier than any plant has evolved to expect. Dr. Carlos Mendoza, who has studied Amazon ecology for 20 years, documents the beginning of what he fears will be the collapse of the world's most important terrestrial ecosystem. The flowering and fruiting cycles have become completely desynchronized. He explains while examining a Brazil nut tree that is simultaneously blooming and dropping leaves in apparent confusion. The relationships between plants and their pollinators, predators, and prey are breaking down because nothing is happening when it's supposed to. Migratory species face perhaps the greatest immediate threat, as the environmental cues they have followed for millions of years become unreliable or disappear entirely. Arctic terns, which navigate using a combination of magnetic fields, star positions, and seasonal daylight patterns, find themselves unable to complete migrations that their species has successfully accomplished for eons. Thousands of birds become stranded in locations where they cannot survive, lacking the food sources their instincts expect to find. The monarch butterfly migration, one of nature's most remarkable phenomena, collapses entirely as the insect's navigation systems become confused by erratic seasonal cues. Butterflies that should be flying south for winter instead scatter in random directions, arriving at destinations where the climate and food sources are completely unsuitable for their survival. The Oyamel fir forests in Mexico that have provided overwintering habitat for millions of monarchs for millennia wait empty as the butterflies that should have arrived never complete their journey. Pollinator populations, already stressed by human activities, face extinction as their carefully timed relationships with flowering plants break down. Bees that emerge from hibernation expecting to find specific flowers blooming discover either bare branches or plants that have already completed their reproductive cycles. The synchronization between pollinator activity and plant flowering, evolved over millions of years, collapses within weeks as seasonal patterns become unpredictable. Agricultural systems worldwide face imminent collapse as both wild and domestic ecosystems fail simultaneously. Crops that depend on insect pollination find themselves without the bees, butterflies, and other insects they need to reproduce. Fruit orchards from California's Central Valley to the apple regions of Washington state face complete crop failure as pollinator populations crash. Farmer Tom Rodriguez, whose family has grown apples in Washington for 4 generations, walks through orchards where trees bloom erratically, some covered in flowers while others remain dormant, all while the few remaining bees seem confused about when and where to forage. My grandfather's notes about when to expect bloom, when to spray, when to harvest, none of it means anything now, he says, staring at trees that seem to be following their own chaotic schedule. 40 years of farming experience, and I feel like I don't know anything about how plants grow. The collapse extends to soil ecosystems, which depend on predictable cycles of freezing and thawing, wet and dry periods, and seasonal temperature variations to maintain the complex communities of bacteria, fungi, and invertebrates that create fertile earth. Earthworms, whose activity helps aerate soil and process organic matter, become confused by erratic temperature patterns and either remain dormant when they should be active or emerge during conditions that kill them. Predator-prey relationships, finely tuned by millions of years of coevolution, break down as the timing of reproduction, migration, and food availability becomes unpredictable. Arctic foxes arrive at seabird colonies expecting to find eggs and young birds, only to discover that the birds have already finished nesting or haven't begun. The foxes face starvation while bird populations, suddenly freed from predation pressure, experience unsustainable population booms that quickly crash when food supplies become inadequate. Forest ecosystems face compound stresses as trees adapted to specific seasonal patterns of temperature, moisture, and daylight struggle to photosynthesize and grow under chaotic conditions. Deciduous forests that should be preparing for winter instead cycle unpredictably between growing and dormant phases, exhausting energy reserves that normally sustain them through predictable seasonal changes. The boreal forests of Canada and Siberia, which represents some of Earth's largest carbon storage systems, begin showing signs of massive die-offs as spruce and fir trees experience temperature and daylight variations their physiology cannot handle. These forests, which have stored carbon for thousands of years, begin releasing massive amounts of greenhouse gases as dead trees decompose, and stressed living trees reduce their carbon uptake. Indigenous communities that have maintained sustainable relationships with local ecosystems for thousands of years watch helplessly as the natural world they depend upon transforms beyond recognition. Traditional hunting and gathering practices become impossible when animal populations crash and plant communities change their growth and reproduction patterns unpredictably. Mary Takota, an elder of the Ojibwe Nation whose ancestors have harvested wild rice in the lakes of northern Minnesota for generations, stares at waters where the rice plants bloom at the wrong time and produce seeds that wildlife cannot use. The rice doesn't know when to grow anymore, she explains to her granddaughter. The ducks and geese that should come to eat the seeds arrive when there are no seeds, and the seeds ripen when there are no birds to eat them. Everything is out of balance. As the second month without the moon draws to a close, ecological surveys worldwide document species extinction rates that exceed the most pessimistic projections for human-caused environmental change. The interconnected web of life, which has adapted to lunar cycles and stable seasons for hundreds of millions of years, faces disruption so fundamental that recovery may be impossible for many ecosystems. But the dangers don't stop at Earth's surface. The sky itself begins to betray us as the moon's absence exposes our planet to cosmic threats that our celestial guardian had been quietly deflecting for billions of years. 2 months after the moon's disappearance, Astronomer Dr. Lisa Park makes a discovery that transforms humanity's understanding of just how much protection we've lost. Working the night shift at the Arecibo Observatory's replacement facility, she notices an anomaly in the data that makes her hands tremble as she reaches for the emergency phone to contact NASA's Planetary Defense Office. We're seeing a 300% increase in near-Earth asteroid approaches, she reports, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. Objects that should have been deflected by the moon's gravitational influence are now following collision courses with Earth, and we're detecting impacts that would have been prevented if our lunar shield were still in place. For over 4 billion years, the moon has served as humanity's cosmic bodyguard, using its gravitational field to deflect or capture countless asteroids, comets, and space debris that might otherwise have struck Earth. The heavily cratered lunar surface tells the story of eons of protection, each impact scar representing a cosmic bullet that hit our satellite instead of our planet. But now, Earth stands naked in the cosmic shooting gallery without its faithful guardian. The first major impact occurs over the Sahara Desert, where a meteorite that would have been nudged harmlessly past Earth by lunar gravity instead screams through the atmosphere and creates a crater 50 meters wide. The explosion, equivalent to several tons of TNT, is fortunately far from populated areas, but it serves as a terrifying preview of what's to come. Satellite imagery shows the blast site smoldering in the desert, a fresh wound in the Earth that represents the beginning of a new age of cosmic vulnerability. Dr. Maria Santos at NASA's Center for Near-Earth Object Studies works frantically to recalculate impact probabilities for known asteroids using models that no longer include lunar gravitational influence. The results are sobering. Asteroids previously classified as no threat are now following paths that could bring them uncomfortably close to Earth. Objects in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, whose orbits were subtly influenced by the moon's presence, begin shifting into new trajectories that increase the likelihood of Earth encounters. We're essentially starting over with our understanding of cosmic risk, she explains to an emergency session of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. Every asteroid tracking model, every impact probability calculation, every piece of data we've collected about space-based threats to Earth, it's all based on the assumption that the moon would continue to provide gravitational protection. Without that protection, we're facing impact risks that could be 10 to 20 times higher than previous estimates. The night sky, once a source of wonder and romance, becomes increasingly menacing as people around the world begin noticing the growing frequency of meteor showers. What would have been occasional shooting stars become nightly displays of cosmic artillery, with dozens of meteors visible each hour as space debris that would have been captured by the moon instead burns up in Earth's atmosphere. Amateur astronomers document the change with growing alarm. Robert Chun, who has been photographing the night sky from his backyard in Arizona for 30 years, captures images that show a dramatic increase in meteor activity. Last week, I counted 47 meteors in a single hour, he posts on astronomy forums that buzz with similar reports from around the world. That's more than I usually see in an entire year. And they're getting bigger. Some are leaving persistent trails that last for minutes instead of seconds. The increased cosmic bombardment poses particular threats to the satellite networks that modern civilization depends upon. Communication satellites, GPS systems, weather monitoring equipment, and internet infrastructure orbiting Earth face unprecedented exposure to micrometeorites and space debris that the moon would have previously deflected or captured. The first major satellite failure occurs when a communications satellite serving Pacific shipping routes is struck by debris and goes offline, disrupting emergency communications for vessels across thousands of square miles of ocean. Space agencies worldwide scramble to protect their orbital assets, but the scale of the threat overwhelms existing defensive capabilities. The International Space Station, humanity's most important foothold in space, faces daily threats from debris that requires increasingly frequent course corrections to avoid. Astronauts aboard the station report seeing meteor impacts on Earth's surface that appear as brief flashes of light, each one representing a cosmic collision that might have been prevented if the moon were still protecting our planet. GS poems. paintings, and stories than perhaps any other natural phenomenon. From Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata to countless folk songs about lovers meeting under moonlit skies, human creativity has been intimately connected to lunar imagery for millennia. Composer Elena Romanoff, working on what she calls her elegy for a lost moon, struggles to capture musically the sense of loss that seems to affect everyone she knows. It's not just that we can't see the moon, she explains to a reporter. It's that an entire vocabulary of human emotion, romance, mystery, contemplation, wonder, was tied to moonlight and lunar imagery. How do you write a love song when moonlit? Walks no longer exist? How do you create a sense of mystery when the night sky no longer holds its most mysterious object? Children growing up in the moonless world face a particular form of cultural loss as fairy tales, nursery rhymes, and bedtime stories filled with moon imagery become relics of a world they'll never experience. Parents struggle to explain references to the man in the moon or cow jumping over the moon to children who have never seen the celestial object that inspired such stories. Teacher Mary Thompson, reading to her first-grade class, finds herself constantly interrupted by questions about moon references in classic children's literature. "What's a moon, Mrs. Thompson?" 6-year-old Emma asks during a reading of Goodnight Moon, the classic bedtime story that has comforted children for generations. The question hangs in the air as Mrs. Thompson realizes she's trying to explain something that these children will only ever know as a historical concept. Navigation traditions that predate GPS technology face extinction as the celestial reference points that guided human exploration and migration disappear. Polynesian wayfinders, whose ancestors navigated thousands of miles of open ocean using stellar and lunar navigation techniques, find that crucial elements of their traditional knowledge become inapplicable to a moonless world. Captain Tevita Moala, one of the last traditional navigators in the Pacific, stands on the deck of his sailing vessel and tries to pass on knowledge that is rapidly becoming obsolete. "The moon was our calendar, our clock, our compass," he explains to young sailors eager to learn traditional wayfinding. "She told us about tides, about weather, about the best times to fish and travel. Now we must learn to read the ocean and sky with one of our most important teachers missing." The tourism industry built around lunar phenomena faces complete collapse. Locations famous for romantic moonlit views, lunar festivals, and moon-watching find themselves without their primary attraction. The romantic tradition of honeymoon destinations chosen for their spectacular moonrises becomes a relic of the past, as couples can no longer share the experience of watching the moon rise over tropical beaches or mountain vistas. Farmers worldwide lose traditional timing methods that have guided agricultural practices for thousands of years. Planting by moon phases, a practice backed by both folklore and some scientific evidence, becomes impossible when there are no lunar phases to observe. Agricultural communities that have used lunar calendars to time everything from planting to harvesting find themselves without traditional guideposts for scheduling crucial farming activities. Mental health professionals report increasing numbers of patients suffering from what psychologists are beginning to call lunar grief, a specific form of loss associated with the absence of moonlight from human experience. The gentle, silvery illumination that has comforted humans throughout our evolutionary history is gone, leaving many people feeling disconnected from natural rhythms that have guided human psychology for millennia. As autumn arrives in the northern hemisphere, though seasonal timing has become increasingly unpredictable due to Earth's axial wobble, humans worldwide face their first Halloween, their first Thanksgiving, their first winter holidays in a world where moonlight no longer transforms familiar landscapes into magical, mysterious realms. But what about us, humans themselves? How would we physically and mentally change as our bodies and minds adapt to a world where one of the most fundamental environmental conditions of our evolution has simply vanished? 6 months after the moon's disappearance, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a chronobiologist at Stanford University, publishes research that reveals the profound ways human physiology is struggling to adapt to a moonless world. Her sleep studies show that the absence of lunar light cycles has disrupted circadian rhythms in ways that affect not just sleep patterns, but fundamental aspects of human health, reproduction, and mental well-being. We're seeing sleep disorders that don't fit any existing diagnostic categories. Dr. Martinez explains to a packed conference room of medical researchers. The human body evolved over millions of years with predictable lunar cycles, providing secondary time cues that supported our internal clocks. Without those cues, we're witnessing widespread chronobiological chaos that affects everything from hormone production to immune system function. Her research reveals that human circadian rhythms, while primarily governed by solar cycles, also respond to subtle lunar influences that scientists are only now beginning to understand. Women's menstrual cycles, which average 28 days, remarkably close to the lunar month, show signs of increased irregularity. Fertility clinics report dramatic changes in conception rates and increased pregnancy complications as reproductive hormones lose the subtle lunar cues that have helped regulate human reproduction throughout our species' evolution. Sleep disorders become epidemic worldwide as the deeper darkness and absence of gentle moonlight disrupt natural sleep-wake patterns. Emergency rooms report a 200% increase in insomnia cases, while sleep clinics find themselves overwhelmed with patients suffering from what doctors are beginning to call lunar sleep syndrome, a condition characterized by fragmented sleep, vivid nightmares, and difficulty achieving deep sleep phases. Maria Gonzalez, a nurse working night shifts at a hospital in Mexico City, notices the changes in her own sleep patterns and those of her colleagues. "I used to be able to sleep during the day between night shifts," she explains to her supervisor. "But now, even with blackout curtains, something feels wrong. My body doesn't know when it's supposed to rest anymore." And the patients are different too, more agitated, more anxious. Like everyone is constantly on edge. Mental health professionals document a worldwide increase in depression, anxiety, and seasonal affective disorder symptoms that seem unrelated to traditional seasonal patterns. The absence of moonlight, which provided gentle illumination that helped regulate mood-affecting neurotransmitters, leaves many people feeling psychologically unmoored in ways they struggle to articulate. Dr. Robert Kim, a psychiatrist in Seattle, finds his practice overwhelmed with patients reporting similar symptoms. They describe feeling disconnected from natural rhythms, as if they're living in an artificial world, he notes in his case files. Many mention dreams about the moon, or waking up in the middle of the night expecting to see moonlight through their windows. It's as if the human psyche is mourning the loss of something it didn't even realize it depended upon. Children seem particularly affected by the change, with pediatricians reporting increased rates of night terrors, sleepwalking, and bedwetting, conditions often associated with disrupted sleep cycles. School psychologists notice attention and learning difficulties that may be related to poor sleep quality affecting cognitive development. Teachers report that students seem more irritable and less able to concentrate during morning classes. That 8-year-old Tommy Chen, whose parents bring him to a sleep specialist after months of nighttime difficulties, represents thousands of children struggling with similar issues. "He used to sleep through the night," his mother explains to Dr. Sarah Park. "But now he wakes up crying, saying the darkness feels too heavy. He asks why the night light in the sky went away, and we don't know how to answer him." The absence of moonlight particularly affects shift workers, whose schedules already disrupt natural circadian rhythms. Night shift nurses, security guards, emergency responders, and others who work while the world sleeps find their jobs significantly more challenging in the deeper darkness. The gentle moonlight that once provided natural illumination for outdoor work is gone, forcing reliance on artificial lighting that creates harsh shadows and eye strain. Police officer David Rodriguez, patrolling the streets of San Antonio, notices that his night vision seems less effective than before the moon disappeared. "It's not just that it's darker," he explains to his partner. "Something about the quality of darkness has changed. Even with flashlights and streetlights, I feel like I can't see as well. And people seem more nervous, more jumpy when they're out at night." Vitamin D deficiency becomes increasingly common as people spend less time outdoors during the enhanced nighttime darkness. The moon's reflected sunlight, while not containing significant amounts of the UV radiation needed for vitamin D synthesis, provided environmental cues that encouraged outdoor nighttime activities. Without moonlight making nighttime environments inviting, people increasingly avoid outdoor activities after dark. leading to reduced overall sun exposure and associated health problems. Farmers and agricultural workers face unique challenges as their traditional work rhythms, often aligned with lunar cycles, become disrupted. Many farming families have worked by moonlight during planting and harvest seasons for generations, but the complete darkness now makes such work dangerous and inefficient. The cost of adequate artificial lighting for agricultural operations strains farm budgets already stressed by crop failures caused by ecological disruption. Sarah Mitchell, whose family has operated a dairy farm in Wisconsin for 4 generations, struggles to maintain operations without the natural light that once guided early morning and late evening chores. Cows are creatures of habit, and their habits were tied to natural light cycles that included moonlight. She explains while purchasing expensive LED lighting systems. Now they're stressed, milk production is down, and we're spending thousands on electricity just to maintain basic operations. Human reproduction shows concerning changes as the hormonal cycles that govern fertility respond to the altered environmental cues. Birth rates decline in many countries as couples experience reduced fertility, while pregnancy complications increase as expectant mothers' circadian rhythms become disrupted. Midwives and obstetricians report changes in labor patterns, with fewer births occurring during what were traditionally peak lunar phases. The immune system, which operates on circadian rhythms closely tied to light-dark cycles, shows signs of dysfunction as natural timing mechanisms become disrupted. Rates of autoimmune disorders increase, while resistance to infectious diseases appears to decline. Medical researchers theorize that the subtle lunar influences on human physiology were more important than previously understood, serving as secondary timing signals that helped coordinate complex biological processes. Cultural practices around the world adapt to accommodate human physiological changes caused by the moonless environment. Traditional festivals and ceremonies that once took place under moonlight move indoors or require extensive artificial lighting. Religious observances that depended on lunar timing must develop new calendrical systems based solely on solar cycles. Indigenous communities report that traditional healing practices, many of which incorporated lunar timing for maximum effectiveness, require adaptation to the new environmental conditions. Medicinal plant harvesting, traditionally timed to lunar phases believed to affect plant potency, must develop new protocols based on available timing cues. Elder Marie Windstorm of the Lakota Nation explains the challenge to younger tribal members. Our ancestors knew when to gather medicines, when to perform ceremonies, when to plant and harvest, all by watching the moon. Now we must learn new ways to listen to the earth and sky, to find other signs that will guide us in maintaining our traditional practices. As the first winter without moonlight approaches in the Northern Hemisphere, mental health professionals prepare for what they fear may be unprecedented levels of seasonal depression and sleep disorders. The combination of shorter days and complete lunar absence creates environmental conditions that no human population has ever experienced throughout our species. Evolution, but humans are resilient, and our response to these challenges will determine whether our species can adapt to a moonless world or whether we must find ways to fight back against the cosmic forces that have taken our celestial companion 0.1 year after the moon's disappearance. Humanity stands at a technological crossroads unlike any in our species' history. In laboratories, government facilities, and private research centers around the world, the greatest minds of our generation work with unprecedented urgency to develop solutions for survival in a moonless world. What emerges is not just adaptation, but a complete reimagining of how human civilization might function when one of our most fundamental environmental constants has vanished. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, the same scientist who first detected Earth's axial wobble, now leads the International Lunar Replacement Project, an ambitious effort to develop artificial systems that might restore some of the stability the moon once provided. His team works around the clock in a repurposed aircraft hangar in Nevada, surrounded by prototype devices that represent humanity's desperate ingenuity in the face of cosmic abandonment. We cannot replace the moon, Dr. Nakamura explains to a gathering of international scientists and engineers, but we can potentially mitigate some of its absence. Our tidal generators won't restore natural ocean rhythms, but they can create predictable water movement that marine ecosystems might adapt to. Our orbital mirrors won't provide moonlight, but they can reflect sunlight to create artificial lunar cycles that might help restore circadian rhythms. The tidal generator project represents one of the most ambitious engineering undertakings in human history. Massive installations anchored to the ocean floor use nuclear-powered pumps to create artificial tidal movements in key coastal areas. The first prototype, installed in San Francisco Bay, successfully creates predictable water level changes that begin to support the recovery of local marine ecosystems. Small populations of shorebirds return to feeding patterns, and some fish species show signs of adapting to the artificial rhythms. Marine biologist Dr. Elena Vasquez, who documented the initial coral reef collapse, now oversees restoration efforts supported by the artificial tidal systems. It's not the same as natural tides, she explains while diving in test areas where artificial currents move water in carefully programmed cycles. But some species are beginning to adapt. The coral polyps show signs of recovery when they have predictable water movement, even if it's mechanically generated rather than gravitationally driven. Meanwhile, in orbit, a constellation of mirror satellites begins reflecting sunlight back to Earth in patterns designed to simulate lunar phases. The project, led by a consortium of space agencies and private companies, aims to provide artificial moonlight that might help restore natural circadian rhythms for both humans and wildlife. The first test illumination over northern Europe creates a gentle silver glow that, while obviously artificial, provides some psychological comfort to populations suffering from lunar grief. The Orbital Mirror project faces immense technical challenges as engineers work to create reflective surfaces that can survive the increased cosmic bombardment that affects all space-based systems in the Moon's absence. Advanced materials science produces new mirror coatings that can self-repair minor impacts, while sophisticated tracking systems allow the mirrors to maintain precise positioning despite gravitational perturbations. Cities worldwide implement comprehensive lighting redesign programs aimed at creating more natural nighttime environments. LED systems programmed to vary in intensity and color temperature throughout the night attempt to simulate the gradual changes in moonlight that once marked the passage of evening hours. Parks and public spaces install specialized lighting that provides enough illumination for safety while maintaining the gentle, non-intrusive quality that moonlight once offered. Urban planner Lisa Chun, working on nighttime lighting projects in Seattle, explains the challenge. We're trying to replace something that was perfectly suited to human needs through millions of years of evolution. Moonlight was bright enough to navigate by, but dim enough not to interfere with sleep. It was directional but soft, providing shadows that created mystery without danger. Recreating those qualities with artificial light requires rethinking everything we know about urban illumination. Agricultural adaptation becomes crucial as farmers worldwide develop new planting and harvesting schedules based on available environmental cues rather than traditional lunar timing. Advanced computer modeling helps predict optimal planting times based on weather patterns, soil conditions, and the erratic seasonal changes caused by Earth's wobbling axis. Greenhouse farming expands dramatically as controlled environments become essential for reliable food production. The Japanese government launches the New Agriculture Initiative, which develops vertical farming systems that can operate independently of natural seasonal cycles. These installations, resembling multi-story buildings filled with growing plants under LED lighting, produce food year-round regardless of the chaotic weather patterns that affect traditional outdoor farming. Similar projects emerge in urban areas worldwide as cities work to achieve food security in an environmentally unstable world. Climate control technology advances rapidly as humanity works to compensate for the atmospheric chaos caused by Earth's axial instability. Massive atmospheric processing facilities, resembling giant air conditioners, help regulate temperature and humidity in key agricultural regions. Weather modification techniques, once considered experimental, become essential tools for maintaining habitable conditions in areas experiencing extreme climate fluctuations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the climatologist who first documented weather pattern disruptions, now leads efforts to develop predictive models for Earth's new climate reality. We can't stop the planet from wobbling, she explains while reviewing data from atmospheric monitoring stations worldwide. But we can potentially predict the changes and prepare for them. Our new weather models don't try to predict normal patterns. They predict chaos and help us determine how to respond to whatever conditions emerge. Asteroid defense becomes a global priority as humanity develops technologies to protect against the increased cosmic bombardment. The International Space Defense Network deploys automated systems that can detect and deflect small asteroids before they reach Earth's atmosphere. Larger installations use directed energy weapons to fragment dangerous objects, while early warning systems provide alerts when major impacts seem inevitable. The first successful asteroid deflection occurs when automated defense systems redirect a 50-meter asteroid that would have impacted near Mumbai. The achievement represents a crucial milestone in humanity's ability to protect itself from cosmic threats that were once absorbed by our lunar guardian. However, the defense systems can only handle relatively small objects, and the threat of larger impacts remains a constant concern. International cooperation reaches unprecedented levels as nations realize that the challenges of a moonless world transcend political boundaries. The United Nations establishes the Emergency Earth Stability Organization, which coordinates global responses to environmental crises caused by lunar absence. Resources are shared freely as countries understand that the survival of human civilization depends on collective action rather than national competition. Space colonization programs, once considered long-term projects for future generations, become urgent priorities as humanity considers the possibility that Earth might not remain habitable indefinitely. Mars colonization efforts accelerate, while lunar base construction, ironically, becomes a priority as humans work to establish footholds elsewhere in the solar system. The absence of the moon makes space travel somewhat easier due to reduced gravitational complications. But the psychological impact of leaving a destabilized Earth creates emotional challenges for potential colonists. Educational systems worldwide adapt to prepare new generations for life in a moonless world. Children learn to navigate by stars alone, study artificial ecosystem management, and develop skills for living in environmentally controlled habitats. Traditional subjects like agriculture, navigation, and environmental science take on new importance as humanity prepares for a future that requires active management of previously natural systems. Genetic research accelerates as scientists work to understand how human physiology might adapt to permanent lunar absence. Research into circadian rhythm disorders leads to treatments that help people maintain healthy sleep cycles without natural moonlight cues. Studies of human fertility patterns in the moonless environment inform medical treatments that help maintain reproductive health despite disrupted hormonal cycles. The second anniversary of the moon's disappearance approaches. These adaptation efforts begin showing promise in some areas, while revealing the limitations of human technology in others. Artificial tidal systems support small ecosystem recoveries, but cannot restore the global oceanic systems that once supported planetary-scale marine food webs. Orbital mirrors provide psychological comfort and some circadian support, but cannot replicate the complex gravitational effects that once stabilized Earth's rotation. Humanity demonstrates remarkable ingenuity and resilience in developing technological solutions to environmental challenges that seemed insurmountable. Yet fundamental questions remain about whether these adaptations can sustain human civilization long-term, or whether they merely delay inevitable consequences of living on a planet whose cosmic context has been fundamentally altered. Yet the question remains: what if the moon didn't vanish through some natural cosmic accident, but was taken by forces beyond our understanding? The mystery of how something so massive could disappear so completely begins to haunt humanity's attempts at adaptation. Picture this. You wake up one morning, step outside, and something feels wrong. The sky looks different. The tides have gone silent. And then it hits you. The moon, Earth's faithful companion for over 4 billion years, has simply vanished. But how does a celestial body weighing 73 quintillion tons just disappear into the cosmic void? As the initial shock waves of this impossible event ripple across our planet, humanity finds itself grappling with questions that challenge everything we thought we knew about our universe. The first theories emerge from the chaos like whispers in the dark. Could this be the work of an unknown cosmic force? Something so powerful it could pluck our moon from its orbit as easily as a child picking an apple from a tree? The universe is vast and mysterious, filled with phenomena we're only beginning to understand. Black holes, dark matter, quantum fluctuations. Any of these cosmic mysteries could theoretically possess the power to make our moon disappear without a trace. Scientists huddle in emergency sessions, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of computer screens as they run calculations that seem to defy logic. The energy required to move the moon would be astronomical, literally. We're talking about forces that could power entire civilizations for millions of years. What kind of natural phenomenon could harness such incredible power? Then, as days turn to weeks and no natural explanation emerges, more unsettling possibilities begin to surface. What if this wasn't natural at all? What if somewhere in the depths of space, an intelligence far beyond our comprehension decided our moon was useful? The thought sends chills down the spines of even the most rational scientists. Imagine a civilization so advanced that they view celestial bodies the way we view resources, something to be harvested, relocated, or repurposed. Perhaps they needed the moon's unique composition for some unimaginable project. Maybe they required its gravitational influence for their own world. Or worse yet, maybe they saw Earth's dependence on lunar cycles as a weakness to be exploited. The technologies we developed during the crisis don't disappear with the moon's return. The new understanding of tidal forces and gravitational systems leads to breakthroughs in energy generation. The psychological techniques developed to cope with disrupted sleep cycles become the foundation for treating various disorders. The international cooperation forged in the crucible of cosmic crisis becomes a model for addressing future challenges. And yet, in quiet moments, when the full moon rises over a landscape that once knew only starlight, people pause in their daily routines to truly look, at that familiar silver disk. They see it now not as a constant, unchanging presence, but as a gift that could vanish again at any moment. Perhaps that's the real lesson of the missing moon. Nothing in this universe is permanent, not even the most fundamental constants of our existence. The Earth spins, the seasons change, civilizations rise and fall. But the dance between our world and its companion continues, for now. Astronomers maintain their vigilant watch, their instruments constantly monitoring lunar orbit and gravitational stability. But the readings show nothing unusual. The moon appears to be exactly where it should be, doing exactly what it has done for billions of years on clear nights. When the lunar light streams through bedroom windows and illuminates the faces of sleeping children, parents whisper the story of the vanishing moon. They tell of 3 years when humanity learned to be brave in the darkness, when we discovered that even cosmic constants can change, and that the universe holds mysteries deeper than our deepest oceans. And sometimes, just before dawn, when the moon hangs low on the horizon like a pearl suspended in dark velvet, it seems to pulse with a gentle light that wasn't there before the vanishing. A light that speaks of journeys taken and lessons learned, of cosmic mysteries that may never be fully explained. The moon has returned, but we are not the same people who lost it. We are a species that has touched the void and found within ourselves the strength to carry on. We are the children of a planet that learned to dance alone in the darkness and discovered that sometimes the most beautiful performances happen when we think no one is watching. And perhaps, in the end, that transformation was the moon's greatest gift, not its presence, but the strength we found in its absence. For in learning to live without our oldest companion, we learned something even more precious. We learned to become worthy of its return. The waves continue their eternal rhythm against shores around the world, carrying with them the echoes of a cosmic mystery that changed everything and nothing, that took away the moon only to give us back ourselves. And in that gentle, hypnotic sound of water meeting land, we find the peace that comes from knowing that some questions are more beautiful than their answers, and some mysteries are meant to cradle us into dreams as infinite as the star-filled sky above.